by YouTube that they pulled down one of my videos that questioned the legitimacy of the election. So that's not good, but that's the world we're living in right now.
Yeah, unfortunately.
Yes, but we forge forward. I've got something like at this point 12 different venues that are carrying the show live. So I feel like if any one of them takes me down, I'll still be cooking along with the other ones. I mean, unless of course they pull the plug on me altogether, which could happen.
Yeah.
I mean, so this is the atmosphere that we're operating in right now. Let's say no more. We're just about to go live on YouTube. There we go. And thank you for joining me, everyone. Charles Moscowitz, Monday through Friday, 12 noon, here at the flagship station, which is YouTube, but about 12 other venues and platforms that are now carrying the program. And my guest is Matthew Vadum, who is the author of, or is a co-author along with 4 other people of Unmasking Antifa, 5 Perspectives on a Growing Threat. Matthew, thanks for joining me today.
Thanks for having me on.
So, Matthew, let's start out by talking a little bit about Antifa and where they came from and who they are.
Okay, well, Antifa or Antifa, I find myself being lazy and always pronouncing it Antifa. Anyway, it's a shortened version of anti-fascist, and it arose from the Weimar Republic, Germany, in between the 2 world wars, and it was created by the Soviets to cause trouble, and one of their main activities was fighting the German Workers' National Socialist Party, the Nazi Party, and so their equivalents, the Sturmabteilung, the SA, they would break up each other's meetings and try and suppress the speech of their enemies. And so, they were thugs that went around and silenced and intimidated people, and that was why they were created, and that is pretty much what they do today as well. They've gone through various iterations over the years. In the 80s, you might have known Antifa branded itself differently. In North America, in the U.S. and Canada, you might have known them as ARA, Anti-Racist Action.
Okay.
And at that point, they were preoccupied with picking fights with the Klan, which has been dying for many years, but somehow they managed to find Klansmen, pull them out of the weeds somewhere.
Well, at that point, the Klan had been thoroughly infiltrated by the FBI and had been really rendered almost moot by the 1980s.
That's right, yeah, and it used to be very powerful and control state legislatures back in the 20s and the 30s and so on. But then it became a shadow of its former self, and it was basically nothing by the time Anti-Racist Action, Antifa, came around.
Now, did Antifa at that time have connections to the Soviet Union, or was it just a spinoff?
It was founded by the Soviet Union. I don't know if they can. I'm not enough of an expert to say that they were still in communication with the Soviet Union at that point.
Okay,
I can't say for sure. So others know more on that topic than I do. But we know that their purpose was still to subvert, the United States and cause problems for what they perceived as the extreme right wing.
So they were the shock troops of the communist movement, sort of sent out on an international level, sort of playing the same role in other countries that the Cheka played in the Soviet Union, which is kind of like the paramilitary group that would go in and try to agitate and cause violence and disturbance and social disorder and terror as a way to destabilize a targeted society. And in this case, that society is the United States. Let me just as a note of history, mention that the Antifa in pre-Nazi Germany was just as bad as the Nazis. They were just as anti-Semitic as the Nazis, I may add, as well, using almost identical rhetoric. I mean, the Nazis might have been more into a race theory, but they were into the idea that the Jews were the capitalists who were controlling the world through their banking and their money, and that they had to be hung. I think it was Ruth Fisher, one of the main activists in Antifa in Germany, said that all the Jews had to be hung from lampposts. So now we're bringing things up to today. They're active in American cities. Suddenly they burst into the scene, I think around the time of the racial disturbances in Ferguson, Missouri. That's when we first heard of them. Is that right?
Well, that's when they started to get back onto people's radar again, and they were, they became active in all of these violent protest movements, and that's when you started to hear about them again, because they had they were still there, but nobody had heard from them in a few decades.
Right.
So this put them back in the national spotlight.
And then, of course, they had another big publicity time in this past summer with the unfortunate death of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor, where they basically came out of the woodwork and started to loot black businesses and burn black neighborhoods and kill black people, including children, in Chicago. And they began to cut a swath across the country, all with the praisings of people like Nancy Pelosi and Kamala Harris and other left-wingers who said that this was a great and glorious movement and they should keep fighting. We had my own congresswoman here in Massachusetts, Ayanna Pressley, say they should stay at it, still burn the neighborhoods. And they became quite prominent. What was their agenda at that time?
And I should say, Ayanna Pressley basically said, I've seen the video on YouTube, that Black Lives Matter and Antifa are essentially the same thing, and right. that there's no distinction between them today.
Well, let's be fair here and just point out that most of the people, I think, who think that they're following Black Lives Matter as a principle are not witting and are not conscious in terms of participating in this. Like I live in Boston, and I see in the suburban, wealthy, predominantly white communities, I see signs on lawns saying Black Lives Matter. I don't think that those people really understand what the actual organization is. They just simply support this nice concept that, of course, Black Lives Matter, all Black Lives Matter, including all the people that Antifa is murdering in the cities. But putting that aside, I think we need to differentiate between that and, the well-meaning liberals who put up those signs. I mean, I think what they're really saying is that we hate Trump, but putting that aside, they have a right to say that. They mean well. Of course, Black Lives Matter. This isn't about that. This is about this particular organization at its core and their alliance with Antifa. So do you see an interlocking aspect to them and Antifa?
Well, apart from all the well-meaning liberals that you just referenced, yeah. Well, the leadership of Black Lives Matter, they worship Assata Shakur and Mumia Abu Jamal, who are both notorious murderers of white police officers, and they think that their view of American society, I guess, is slightly different than Antifa. They view America as essentially a racist society, and then they work backwards from that presumption to tie everything to racism, that capitalism is racism, and so on. Whereas Antifa is more sort of a straightforward, anarcho-communist Marxist thing. That capitalism is bad and so on. So they have been working together for a while now, and have become in their organizations have meshed. Even though they're still separate groups, but they formed. I guess you could say, if this were a business operation, you'd say they've formed a working partnership. And they are cooperating with each other, and there's a lot of overlap between the two groups. But they both want to overthrow the government of the United States, and they're both they're both bad news, obviously.
Okay, my guest is Matthew Vadum. The book is Unmasking Antifa: 5 Perspectives on a Growing Threat. I think that for public relations purposes, BLM has toned down their rhetoric, especially since a year ago when they were talking about, fry them like bacon, and that weird chant that they had as a
in
march.
Minnesota.
Yes, that, and also the murder of 4 cops in Dallas and 2 cops in New York City who were sitting in their squad car, both of whom, by the way, happen to be minorities, not that that matters, who was shot in cold blood by this guy who said he had been inspired by BLM. So I think that since then they have sort of reined it in a little bit. They've tried to go a little more mainstream, especially now that they're getting huge amounts of money pouring in from municipalities and from various donors. Big
corporations.
Big corporations who are shaking down cities, municipalities, people like George Soros. I mean, everyone is pouring money in.
I don't even know if Black Lives Matter, it's fair to say they shook them down. It seems after the death of George Floyd, the money started coming out of everywhere, out of every pore. And
it would be interesting to follow that.
They didn't even have to solicit it.
I mean, it would be interesting to follow the money there, and we should, if we had any investigative journalists who were worth anything, which they're not, most of them are not, they would actually take a look at the finances and who actually where the money went. We know that I think it's been already determined that a reasonably large percentage of it went directly into the coffers of the Democratic National Committee. But putting that aside, I want to bring things up to the incursion at the U.S. Capitol. Now, to my way of thinking, on the surface, this to me looked like something that was an attempt, and it in fact was, and ended up being an attempt to disrupt the joint session of Congress, where there were 7 states that were contesting the election. And they had representatives and senators sign a document requesting that there be a hearing on each of those states, which is what the Constitution calls for. And just as they began the hearing in Arizona, which was the first state called on the alphabet that was being contested, all of a sudden, as the testimony was coming out, and it was really stunning testimony, and it was very interesting, and finally, the American people were going to get to hear what might have happened, and maybe not. I mean, it would have been a debate. All of a sudden, everything gets shut down. You have these people coming into the Capitol dressed in clown outfits, suddenly interrupting everything, and then everything is shut down, and then the Congress reconvenes after midnight, and they gavelled Biden in. Now, I'm not here to contest that. I just point out that this was not good news for Trump. I mean, this was not good news for those of us who simply wanted to get to the truth and hear the evidence. Was Antifa / BLM involved in that? Do you have evidence of that?
Well, sure it was, because John Earl Sullivan was of Utah, was arrested for participating in the riots, and in fact, he even posing as a journalist, even though he has no contacts, no connections to actual journalism producing organizations, claimed to be a journalist, a documentarian, and he shot about 90 minutes of video of the riot that took place and that he was fully a part of. He was telling people to destroy things and to smash windows, and it's right there in his video. It's an interesting snapshot of what happened from the point of view of an agitator, of a documentarian who was actually involved in the wrongdoing. So this self-styled Lenny Riefenstahl is making a production of it, and he is associated with both. He's an example of these two movements working together, Black Lives Matter and Antifa, because he's associated with both of them. Right. And there have been other people who are under investigation for participation in this, and it's very suspicious. No, obviously, not everybody who was wearing a Trump shirt or carrying Trump paraphernalia or a flag who went into the Capitol on January 6th and disrupted the official election certification proceedings in the joint session of Congress. Not everybody was, a fake Trump supporter.
Got it. Yeah.
An Antifa. Obviously, there were some people who did that.
Sure.
But the question is, who started it? Was it provocateurs like this fellow that I just mentioned, who's from Utah, John Earl Sullivan, or was it was it actual Trump supporters? And right now, the evidence is kind of fuzzy on that, but it looks like the people who supposedly stormed the Capitol, for the most part, didn't actually storm it. They were let in.
They were let in, and everybody.
Videos of U.S. Capitol police officers. The Capitol complex has its own police force that patrols the grounds and the neighborhood around there on Capitol Hill in D.C. That they let them on the property. There's lots of videos of them holding doors for them and moving barricades. And they don't really look scared in the video.
And in fact, they're hanging out with. There's a film of them actually hanging out with the guy with the buffalo horns, who is sitting at the dais in the U.S. Senate, and he's like, bantering with him. I mean, it was not like, to me, that's a very strange thing.
While he's sitting on the dais, but yes.
I mean, that I hope is a part of the.
With them. They did selfies
That's right.
with them.
I mean,
and
is that going to?
They were rioters. They were very well behaved because a lot of them went around and picked up garbage that got garbage cans that got knocked.
That's
over.
right. There was no real. I mean, there was a few broken windows, but I don't think there was any actual real property damage. And I'm not here to apologize for this. Believe me, it destroyed the opportunity of the American people to see the evidence, which is why I'm suspicious.
Which is why you have to be suspicious about it. Was that supposed to happen to help seal Biden's victory? And I don't normally embrace, conspiracy theories all the time, but this is a pretty good one.
We have to take a look at who benefited. Who benefited?
Who benefited from this?
Yeah.
Biden and the Democrats.
That's right. And now they, of course, used that, in the same way, not to make a comparison outright, but the same way that the Nazis used the Reichstag fire, which I've talked about. Basically, to give a little brief, a few weeks after Hitler became Chancellor of Germany, there was a Reichstag fire, the Reichstag being the German parliament, the German equivalent of the U.S. Capitol, and that there was this guy who was a communist who was accused. That's not the relevant point. It's always been considered by most historians to have likely been an inside job. But either way, it was used by the Nazi regime to suspend the Reichstag and to enact emergency measures which suspended the German constitution. And we know that, of course, ultimately led to the World War II and the Holocaust. So I'm not comparing. I'm just saying that, it was sort of like what Rahm Emanuel famously said on a Sunday talk show the day after Obama was elected, that you cannot let a good crisis go to waste. And this was an opportunity to finally have some kind of proof that it was the right wing was involved with a violent incident, because we all know that most of these were left wing instances, and that they were.
It takes a lot to make conservatives violent.
Well, I mean, the idiocy of it is that they actually claimed that Donald Trump was literally conspiring to overthrow the government through terrorism. I mean, the guy with the fuzzy, rat tails and bullhorns, he was sent in there to overthrow the government. I mean, think about the idiocy of that. They're going in there. What are they going to do? Declare a new president? I mean, it's so moronic.
Yeah, were they going to kidnap Pence? And how would that have allowed them to have gained control over the organs of the federal government anyway?
Well, I mean, they think, what is Trump sitting in some smoke-filled room somewhere? Let's see, how can I stay president? I know. We'll send these bozos into the U.S. Capitol, and they'll seize the building, and then I'll still be president. I mean, and yet they, of course, went on to impeach him, and now they're saying, this was a, quote, insurrection. He was involved in trying to plot. This is a worse conspiracy theory than the one that sustained them for 3 years, which was that Trump is spying for the Russians. I mean, it's
which these leftists still believe. And
they're not letting go.
Nowadays.
Never mind the fact that Mueller and his brown shirts finally came, were called out onto the carpet and had nothing. That doesn't matter. The point is that they still are using that to agitate And, they're using the phony phone, the perfect phone call, which, by the way, proved that, in fact, Biden had done what Trump was trying to find out about, that this was somehow, there was something wrong with that, and they impeached him for that. So, but getting back to Antifa, and one more thing, just as a little mop up on this, it was a week before this event that people like myself and many other good conservatives were saying this is going to be an important event, that Congress is going to convene. We're going to finally get to have a hearing on the evidence, and that people are going to Washington. And I was very clear to say, and you can look at my TikToks and my YouTubes that verifies it, that we ought to treat this like a civil rights event similar to the March on Washington, where you had the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King speak and the I Have a Dream speech, and people showed up in a shirt and tie and, and in their formal clothes, and everybody was very, solemn and well behaved, that we ought to do that because we are going to see infiltration from Antifa, and they are going to be putting on Trump gear and trying to meld into the crowd. So it's not like we didn't know this was going to happen. We didn't know it was going to happen to the extent that they would break into the Capitol. And as you say, Matthew, there must have been some assistance there. But Trump is also being blamed.
And good luck convicting a lot of the people who went into the Capitol, because you're not going to be able to prove that they did anything wrong if they were invited in by the police and the police opened the door. If you wouldn't know that you're not supposed to go in there. Who would know if you were just out there, an innocent, member of the crowd, and you hadn't seen any violence because the cops open the door and removes the barricades? Anyway, a lot of these people they've charged with whatever the crime is, unauthorized entry onto government property or whatever it is, they're going to get off.
Well, that's the thing.
Very few convictions.
Yeah, and Trump has been blamed. One of the things that has added to the hysteria of the impeachment is that Trump is being blamed for not having called out the National Guard or not having called out, appropriate security forces in advance to prevent this, and that's being used as an excuse or as proof that he wanted to overthrow the government.
But the Capitol had a security force.
Well, that's just it. Look,
it wasn't doing its job.
That's right. To go into a federal building. Here in Boston, if I want to go, I had to go to the Tip O'Neill building last year to renew my passport. That's the big federal building in downtown Boston. To get into that place, I had to have, I had to take off my belt and put my my cell phone and a little dish, which went through the thing.
Just like going through TSA.
Yeah. And go through the metal detector. Then they had to do a scan with a wand. That was just to get in. And that's not a major federal building. That's a Boston federal building. The U.S. Capitol is the most important federal building in the country. And so, I don't understand how it is that people could get in there. Where were the scanners? Where were the security people?
Exactly. It was too easy for them to get in, and that's that's part of what makes this so suspicious.
Well, that's right, and I think that I wonder, Matthew, is this being investigated by the FBI? I don't trust the FBI, especially since we know that they were sort of in the bag for the deep state against President Trump. But I don't know. And I don't trust them either. And when I say that, I'm not talking about the average rank and file FBI agent who I do trust. I'm talking about the leadership.
The organization as a whole.
Yeah, that's right. Is there, and do we know anything about the investigation of this? I suppose that now that Biden has been installed, it's going to be very difficult to get to the bottom of this, isn't it?
Yeah, I don't think we know. We don't know the FBI doesn't discuss its methods, and if we learn what they're doing, it's generally through leaks or through something that they've found it to their advantage or been required to disclose to the public. So I don't think we know.
No, and unfortunately, we're not going to be knowing either. I don't think. I hope I'm wrong. So what is Antifa up to now? Now that they've had this. Possibly, and again, this is alleged, and we don't know all the facts, but they've had this successful action at the U.S. Capitol building, and that they were able to do in classic communist style, they were successful by use of their various minions in the media and their supporters, portray it as the action of their enemy. They were able to, I mean, that's a classic approach. What are they doing now? I mean, they've had a great success.
Well, right now they're doing what they do best, and that's burning down Portland, Oregon. They love doing that, and they've resumed their. I'm not sure if they ever really stopped burning down Portland. Maybe we just got crowded out by the other news. But yeah, they're causing trouble in their strongholds, and I'm sure we haven't heard the last of them. They're a bunch of angry, very determined people, and a lot of them have been. You've seen news that a lot of them have been protesting Biden, because even a leftist like Biden isn't left-wing enough for them. And Biden has been, and the Democrats have been reluctant to denounce Antifa because so much of their base supports them. So they've been very careful about that. And you know that the DNC actually officially endorsed Black Lives Matter in a resolution in 2015. I wrote about it at Front Page Mag, and you can find it there. So DNC and Black Lives Matter are tied at the hip, and Antifa is in this, functional alliance with Black Lives Matter. So one could say almost that the Democratic Party is Antifa right now, if one were so inclined.
And exactly what is their claim in the now looting and burning in Portland, Oregon, and I think also in Seattle? I mean, exactly what's their beef with Biden? Do they say? I mean, or is this just anarchy?
Well, my understanding is they still, they don't like Biden, and they still want to burn the U.S. system down, and they don't care if Biden is in charge or if Trump is in charge. And at least in that respect, they are consistent, and they're anti-American to the core, and they want to overthrow the government. So
right, and I think
that objective hasn't changed.
And my understanding officially is that their beef with Biden is that he's not going to be abolishing ICE, and they want to completely end, want open borders and an end of any apprehension of undocumented immigrants.
Well, Biden is not going to abolish ICE, but he's just going to render them toothless. And he's going to open up the borders and let more illegals in. The caravans have already formed in Central America. They're marching towards the Texas-Mexico border. And he's going to try and push through a massive amnesty by any means possible. And, he may have the numbers in Congress to do it. Maybe not.
Right. Well, I don't see how it's going to help him politically to have thousands of people, and particularly children, swarming on the border. And by the way, not to bring up an issue, but they're not going to be wearing masks likely.
That will horrify him. Biden was horrified that when lawmakers thought they were running for their lives on January 6th, that they didn't stop to put masks on. This is the kind of stupid statist mentality that we're dealing with here.
I mean, my own
with their masks on.
my own
from an angry mob.
My own Congresswoman Ayanna Pressley, not to mention her again, said that this was a form of chemical warfare, that they weren't wearing masks. Whatever. Anyway,
she really, in a just world, she'd be in a lunatic asylum. But anyway,
yeah. And by the way, she and her gang of squad members voted against a $3.5 million appropriation to help with humanitarian aid to illegal immigrants coming over the border, because she thought it might help Trump. So, I mean, what's she responsible for?
Well, that's why the pandemic restrictions are coming down now in California and in your state, or about to anyway.
They are
because Biden is president, and
it served its purpose.
Yeah, it's just like any reasonable person can see that the vaccines, where also the distribution was withheld until Biden or the recent vaccines, because there's more than one. They didn't announce how effective they were, the tests that they were ready to go until after Trump had lost the election. So suddenly everything's coming up roses now that Trump is defeated, and you're going to see a lot more of that. These things that they didn't want to happen because Trump was president, and he'd get the credit for the good news.
Meanwhile, blood is on their hands because there were a lot of people who died, and I'm not even talking about the majority of people who died from this horrible virus who were in nursing homes.
Suicides and stuff.
Yeah, suicides, and you have
that's stuff that's harder to see and harder to track and harder to connect directly to.
Yeah, and I know that it's
COVID-19 and the pandemic lockdowns.
I know it's a harsh word to use, but I would also say there's a little genocide going on when you have blue state governors like Cuomo putting COVID-19 active people in nursing homes while the Navy has their ship right in New York Harbor empty. And by the way, this new Secretary of Health in the Biden administration was the assistant secretary in Pennsylvania when they did the same policy, and she pulled out her 95-year-old mother in advance. So it's not like they didn't realize what they were doing.
Well, can we put an asterisk beside the pronoun she there?
Yeah, let's not go into that because they'll pull my YouTube channel. We can't talk about that on YouTube.
Okay, but I don't. Rachel Levine is, I think, nominated to be an assistant secretary of health, not to be the actual secretary of health, who is going to be Xavier Becerra, the former congressman who's now California Attorney General. So just to make that clear, Becerra, not Levine. Levine will be farther down on the totem pole, but still, a senior official if confirmed.
Right. So here we are. The administration has been installed. Do you think that Antifa is still up to their antics and still involved with leftist revolutionary activity, burning neighborhoods and looting businesses? And now we have the caravan approaching the border. I mean, I still think that there are some positive signs in that we still have at least some measure of a system of checks and balances to throw a wrench. Like, for example, there was a good judge in Texas, that being Drew Tipton, who has put a stay on Biden's executive order ending deportations. You have now Mitch McConnell has decided, even though we can discuss his behavior, which is pretty bad toward Trump, he has decided that he's not going to go along with getting rid of the Senate filibuster. And so that will stay in place, which means that the left isn't going to be able to just gavel through their entire agenda. And I think that the third thing is that the phony impeachment, this whole fraud, is dead in the water. Ain't going to happen. Even John Roberts, who we could discuss separately, is not like a great guy. Nevertheless, has suddenly decided that he's not going to preside over a phony impeachment. And so I think it's not happening.
No, Kamala Harris doesn't want to either.
So there you go. I mean, and I think that you have, maybe what happens often with the left, and it usually augurs in favor of freedom, is that they overstep themselves. They become too drunk with their own authoritarian tendencies and their own lust for power, and they begin to come out in the open and do things that are going to be just too obvious. They get lazy. They get sloppy. I think that's part of this impeachment conviction. About half of the American public believes that the election had been I'll use the S word. Let's not say what it is because YouTube might take me down. And I believe that there is evidence for that. But now they want to go in for like the kill. They want to have Trump's head on a silver platter. And I think it's an overstep, and I think it's going to boomerang against them.
Yeah, well, they do tend to overreach when they're in power, and we can only hope that the backlash against them is strong enough to undermine them,
exactly,
and defeat their efforts, defeat the leftist juggernaut that seems that wants to destroy what's left of our republic.
Indeed. And so I still believe that we have a system of checks and balances. I still have confidence in our system. We still have to realize that there was a red wave on election day, with one exception, and that's a very questionable exception. But in fact, Republicans took back, I believe, at least two, if not three, state houses. And that they're
and
with
a very strong showing in the House of Representatives.
That's right. It's a hair's breadth away. 10 Republican women were elected. You have, I think, that the Democrats only have a 3-member majority there. So it's not over. I mean, we still have a system in place, and we still have plus you had 75 million people voting for Trump. So right. I feel
unless HR 1 passes, and then there'll never be another fair election again.
That's right, and that's a topic we should do another show on, and that's coming up. It's interesting that that's the first piece of legislation presented by the Democrats, and it is horrendous. Right.
That's their so-called election reform measure that would basically ban everything involved that I can think of, and that assures electoral integrity and makes it a total free-for-all.
Oh, it federalizes elections.
Than the last election.
It federalizes election policy, which the Constitution, Article 1, Section 3, says resides with state legislators. At the same time, we've got Rand Paul, who has said that he's going to go around this year and visit every state legislature to try to educate them in terms of what their constitutional authorities are. And I think that can be challenged constitutionally, because the Constitution is pretty clear. It is the state legislators who regulate elections, and that the national election is conducted. There are 50 of them, 50 states. It's not a national election in the literal sense. But, they'll probably try to abolish the Electoral College. They want to make D.C. a state, so they can get 2 more senators. I mean, it's really corrupt. Maybe pack the Supreme Court if it doesn't go their way. This is all out in the open. I don't think I'm confident that the American people aren't going to go for it.
Well, I'm not, but
okay.
I hope you're right.
I know I might be looking at things with rosy-colored glasses. I agree.
I hope you're right, and we have to fight hard. But
of course,
I really don't know what's going to happen. I've given up on trying to predict the future.
All right, so Matthew Vadum, what are you working on now? I know you've got great columns and books. What's up with you?
Well, I write the book that I contributed to on Antifa was published by Center for Security Policy Press, but I'm a regular writer for FrontPageMag.com of the David Horowitz Freedom Center, yes. And I write every single day for the Epoch Times.
Oh, they're great. They're doing a great job. They're really
thanks.
Something.
I'm their Supreme Court correspondent, and when there's no Supreme Court news, I cover other legal news. So, it keeps me pretty busy. So
excellent.
So frontpagemag.com and the Epoch Times, and my own personal website where I archive all my articles is MatthewVadum.com.
Okay. So listen, Matthew, stay in touch. If you have any stories you'd like to break on my show or just discuss on my show, please drop me a note. I'm doing it Monday through Friday, 12 to 1 p.m. live. And I really appreciate you joining me today.
Great. Well, you're welcome, and pleasure to talk with you today.
All right. Thanks a lot.
Okay.
All right. And I think to wrap things up, I am going to do a bit of an open line segment here. You're welcome to join the program. 617-396-4958. What is on your mind? Would you like to comment on these or other stories? 617-396-4958. Come on down. Matthew Vadum is here. He's the author of Unmasking Antifa, 5 Perspectives on a Growing Threat. He's got a bunch of other good books here, too, that go back a ways. I particularly like Subversion, Inc., which was a good book, Matthew.
Thank you.
Gets into the whole question of Acorn. And by the way, their name has popped up recently in connection to voter irregularities. And speaking of which...
The Texas spinoff, the Texas Organizing Project, was engaged in some mischief in the November election, and some of the chapters are more active than others. The one in New York, the successor organization, New York Communities for Change, is very active. And then others are less active, like the one in your neighborhood, New England United for Justice. I'm not really sure what they're doing nowadays. But New York Communities for Change and the California spinoff, Alliance of Californians for Community Empowerment, is pretty busy. More, the Missouri spinoff, Missourians Organizing for Reform and Empowerment. They really love these long names, don't they? More was quite active in the Michael Brown riots in Ferguson, Missouri.
Right, and they even got a congresswoman elected.
Sure, they did. The wacky, what's her name? Bush.
She makes the squad look moderate. Yeah, I mean, and also, I don't know if you have any information on this. This could be, I think this is more than rumor, but I've seen that former Weather Underground member Rosenberg, who was involved with the bombing of the U.S. Capitol and the looting back in the 1970s. Talk about insurrection. She fled the country, spent about 20 years in Cuba. She was pardoned by Obama. She comes back, and now she's an advisor for BLM.
Yeah, I think you've summed it up accurately.
I mean, hello. That to me, that should tell us everything we need to know.
And the adoptive son of Bill Ayers and Bernadine Dorn is the district attorney in San Francisco now, Chesa Boudin. Boudin or Boudin.
Boudin, yeah. Did he get any George Soros funding for that?
Yeah, I'm pretty sure he did.
Yes, because Soros understood where the power lay in the United States, and that is with district attorneys. And he was involved with supporting various of them around the country and helping them get elected. And these are some of the same people that are giving a pass to a lot of various crimes and mischiefs.
So did the crazy new DA in Los Angeles, George Gascon, who was the DA in San Francisco previously, so he caused damage there. Now he's causing trouble in L.A., and his own deputy prosecutors, deputy DAs, are suing him because he's so awful. And then you have the Philadelphia DA, whose name escapes me right now, but I've written about him, and he has caused a lot of headaches in Philadelphia, and he was sued recently by, there was a legal action by Mrs. Faulkner, the widow of Daniel Faulkner, the policeman murdered years ago, a few decades ago, by Mumia Abu Jamal, because she didn't want this guy. Now the name just came back to me. Larry Krasner is the DA, and he's so openly and in your face a Trump hater, and hates cops, and even joked that he could never get elected because of his track record. Somehow he managed to get elected with Soros money, and this Pennsylvania Supreme Court, corrupt as it is, refused to remove him from the various frivolous jailhouse appeals that Mumia Abu Jamal has been filing, trying to get special treatment in his dotage. And, he can't be trusted to represent the people of Pennsylvania properly. So Mrs. Faulkner, the widow, tried to have him removed from the case, and it did not succeed. Pennsylvania Supreme Court left him in charge of representing the state, the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, in Mumia's cases.
I wonder if he's in any way connected to the vote count in Philadelphia, but let's not even go there. Also, the DA in Chicago is a Soros stooge who conspired to help Jesse Smollett in his fraud against the Chicago police, and the DA in St. Louis, I think, has her fingerprints all over the recent violence there and the attempt to tear down the St. Louis statue and
charging the two lawyers who defended their property by bringing out guns. They didn't even threaten people with them. They just brandished their weapons. They showed them.
That's right. And that's a crime for them.
You're allowed to do when there's a threat.
Of course. I mean, exactly. And they're the ones who are now charged with a crime.
Saved their lives. They've saved their property from being, God knows what the angry leftist mob would have done to it.
So, I guess we should say thank you to George Soros, and the radical cadre and the brown shirts that are around them and that are subverting this republic. And, I mean, it's...
ironically, sure.
Exactly. So anyway, Matthew, listen, I want to thank you for joining me this afternoon. And let's do it again soon.
Okay.
All right.
Good luck to you, sir.
Thank you very much.
Okay, bye-bye.
Bye-bye.